Now you're very welcome along to the Huddle Breakdown. Enda call here with you as we look back on Celtic's 6-1 victory against Hibernian at the weekend. A big result for Celtic at a time that they definitely needed it, and a performance to go with it. A much changed lineup to the one that we saw in the Champions League against RB Leipzig. Hart was in goals. At right back was Ralston, the sub that I've been begging for over the last couple of weeks. Bernabei came in at left back, Jens and Carter Vickers in the middle. O'Reilly played as the number 6 in this game, which we're definitely going to talk about on this podcast. Aaron Moy is the number 8, Rio Hatate as the other one. Haksabanovic on the left wing with Giakoumakis up front, and Jamesy Forrest, 100 goals. We're going to be touching on him later on the podcast as well. Alan Morrison and Juco James are with me as always. So Alan, I'll throw this one to you first. None of this matters because Celtic can't score in the Champions League, so we should just forget about this 6-1 victory.
Yeah, so I mean, actually, this is a classic game where we talk about. You'll hear us using the term game state a lot, right? So if you want a case study in how game state can alter the stats of a game, or force teams to play in a way that the stats of a game may not tell you the full story of the game, then this would be one of those games. And the reason I say that is that when you go into an early 24-minute 3-goal lead, it completely changes the dynamic of the game, right? So, you don't need to go chasing chances. You don't need to be trying 25-yarders, etc. So Celtic, although they had a healthy 20, I logged it at 21 shots. They, by most sites, they only racked up about 2.5 to 3 xG on 6 goals. You think, oh well, this is classic mean reversion, but actually I think it's different. I think it's to do with game state. It's to do with the fact that we just didn't have a lot of volume of chances because we didn't need to. You simply didn't need to chase it. You could just control the game fairly well, and also the onus is on the other team then to try and either do something or at least not lose face. And certainly Hibs through half-time 4 changes, they changed the shape to a 3-5-2, and Celtic took a bit of time to kind of work that out, and they had a bit of momentum for a good part of that early part of that second half. That all again goes to dampen some of the numbers on Celtic's behalf, but in all other respects it was a 6-1 game, and actually contrary to what people may think, Celtic are overperforming on their expected goals this season if you look at it overall. It's just harder to score in Europe, and there might be other factors at play like confidence and so forth, and better defenders and chances not being as good as you think they are. And that was certainly true in the Leipzig game, where I think some of the XG numbers I thought were probably a little bit inflated on the actual quality of the chances themselves, based on things like the height of the ball and was it coming behind people and so forth. So a lot to unpack there, but overall I thought Hibs were a good team for Celtic to play. I was obviously Lee Johnson, new manager, I was very interested to see how they were going to play, and I thought, based on the stats before the game, not having really watched them that much, was that they'd really done well to suppress opposition shots, to limit other opposition XG. They had the third best XG differential in the league. They actually had the best rate in the league for their own goalkeeper having to make saves. So they're protecting the goalkeeper really well as well. So all that added up to me feeling very nervous about this game. But what I didn't realise was quite how high a line that they would play. And that allowed, and also they couldn't have prepared for the lineup that Celtic played, and they certainly couldn't have prepared for how well Bernabei and Haksabanovic on the left, and the pace at which they attacked them and ripped them apart really for the opening sort of 3 goals. They couldn't have prepared for that because they've only been on the park once together at Ross County. So, having then got that lead, it was a completely different game, a very difficult game for then Hibs to kind of counter. They kept the high line. They were trying to do similar things to Celtic in that they were trying to get a lot of bodies forward, right? Which obviously against a team like Celtic is going to leave you a little bit exposed. They weren't trying to build the play so much. They were trying to bang long, big diagonals. They've got 2 centre backs that are pretty good at playing long passing, so they utilised them quite a lot. So it's an interesting way to play. I think they'll get a lot of success actually if they stick with it against most of the rest of the league, because I think they're going to have a real good go at it. They're going to get bodies in the box. They're going to push the fullbacks on. They're going to have lots of numbers attacking the box. So I think they'll do really well when they settle into it. But having got caught by Celtic early, it was just a nightmare for them. And in the end, it was almost the perfect antidote for Celtic to kind of as a pick-me-up really after recent performances.
Yeah, and I actually I follow quite a number of Hibs supporters, surprisingly enough, and I think the consensus was that Lee Johnson is actually a guy that they really like at the minute, and it is starting to turn a little bit for them. But I think what you referenced there is that it was hard to prepare for this game, firstly, and then when they did go out and Celtic were playing like Matt O'Reilly, for example, as a number 6 rather than a number 8, and Haksabanovic on the left of Bernabeu. I think that just confused the Hibs players a little bit, and they got confused in what they were supposed to do. Before we go on, because there will be comments on this channel about the opposition standard and the difference in Celtic's performance against the likes of Hibs and what they were putting in against the Champions League standard. So let's get the elephant in the room out of the way early on here, James, about how bad Hibs actually were in this game, because we will talk about all the good things that Celtic did, but it is also important to recognize that it was not much of a challenge. The way that Celtic played was very, very effective in breaking down the way that Hibs were supposed to play in this game.
Yeah, so to be charitable to their manager, it reminded me when I heard read some of the comments, and I think characterizations of his post-game comments, it reminded me of our discussion on here about how Celtics game plan in Leipzig may not have persisted after the first few minutes after they blitzkrieged us. And I suspect, to your point, Enda, that might have been part of what happened. So that's the charitable part. The less charitable part is, to be playing that kind of a high line against us at home. I question, unless you're going to go full out high press, attack the back five, and just go for it. And I've talked about this before, kind of do that or really try to get an early goal off a mistake or something, and then maybe retrench. But, there's a reason why after the St. Mirren game, we talked about how complimentary we were of their game plan, of their execution of that game plan, and how it was a royal pain in our butt because of how good those two things were. And I think this was kind of the exact opposite of that. And to put this into perspective, so first of all, their defensive line. So this is a statistic that StatsBomb maintains, which is like the average position on the field that they have in a defensive action against Celtic. It was higher than what Man City has averaged in the Champions League this season. Okay. It was way higher than we've had in pretty much any game. It was higher than our defensive line in the 6-0 versus Dundee last season, right? To put it when we were absolutely, hammering them with possession in their half. So the flip side of that is that their pressure statistics. So they typically have been having about 60% possession. They had 43% in this game for obvious reasons. Their number of pressures were actually similar to what they've been having on an average basis in their other games. So that means they were maintaining this crazy high line, not really applying much pressure when they didn't have the ball, or counter pressures, which were down about half. Actually, their counter pressures were much lower. So to me, it looked like a very incoherent plan that was badly executed. So probably, like I said, kind of the exact opposite of St. Mirren. The only thing I'll say is that they've been very they've been beneficiaries of some positive variance so far this season. So I think they've played, I calculated, it's like 17% of their minutes have been against opposition down a man or more. And the net XG in that is well over 2 for obvious reasons. So I think some of their underlying season-long data has been skewed because of that. And they're probably, I would say 4th, but a distant 4th behind Aberdeen if you kind of adjust for that so far. So again, they're not crap or anything, but to be coming in and play this kind of way and to do it incoherently at Celtic Park, I think, they got what they had coming to them.
What you described there, James, is exactly what we said about Celtic and Leipzig, right? So to give Lee Johnson, to give Lee Johnson, is due. He's, we're a year and a bit into Postecoglou, and this is what we got in Leipzig. It takes time, I guess is what I'm saying. It takes time and a little bit of patience. So Hibs fans, don't despair. I think what he's trying to do is going to be, if not innovative, at least different to a lot of what the way a lot of the teams in that league play, and I think it will be beneficial because it seems it's sensible to what the players you've got. But there's going to be bumps in the road, like there was on Saturday.
With David Marshall playing sweeper keeper.
Well, yeah.
Look, I think teams like Hibs, they just have to be the best of the rest, really. They don't have to challenge Celtic and Rangers just yet. But we'll move on to Celtic because there were some really interesting things to talk about from this game. And we'll start with the back line because Bernabei was obviously a key player in this game, coming up the left wing with Haksabanovic. And it's, one of the games that we definitely got to see what he's able to do. But I want to start with right back because that's where I've been talking about for the last number of weeks and questioning whether Juranovic should be rested and Anthony Ralston get an opportunity. He certainly got his opportunity in this game. And I think he took it quite well. And look, we have to probably once again acknowledge that he wasn't up against much when it came to his defensive actions. But going forward is where I have my biggest issue with Juranovic. I think he can often be wasteful in the final third with his crossing. Ralston, I think, put in a couple of good crosses in this game, and he also played the amazing through ball to Lila Bada for Giakoumakis' second goal. So I think he showed a lot going forward and showed that he is Celtic's second choice right back for a reason and is there to challenge Juranovic. Willing to be corrected on all of this, but Alan, what did you make of Ralston? And what's his attacking output in comparison to Juranovic?
Yeah, so I dug out a few things just for you, right? So obviously with Ralston, I mean, Juranovic has played, I think, equivalent to around 10 games this season, whereas I think Ralston's up around 4, maybe 5 games worth of minutes. So a bit of a warning there. Yeah, 4.1, let's call it. But so I think this is a classic. I think there's two things at play here in terms of what's driving perception if you weren't following the numbers closely. One is the classic what you actually produce versus how you're performing conundrum, which I think we're seeing it positively fall Ralston's way. And the second is to do with just sheer volume of involvement, so just number of actions on the ball. So let me kind of explain that a little bit more. So with Ralston then, I couldn't believe this. I know he's only played 4 games, but I don't believe he's had a single shot at goal yet in any game. Now, I'm willing to be corrected on that, and I might have made a mistake somewhere, but I've got him as 0 shots, right? 0 XG, right? Whereas Juranovic's XG is only 0.04, so they're neither of them are really carrying much of a goal threat. But in chances created, which is probably more important, you might surprise you to know that Ralston's 1.47 chances created, and Juranovic's 1.65. Expected assists, Ralston's 0.18, Juranovic's 0.28. So again, ball carries, again, might surprise you. Ralston's 2.8, sorry, Juranovic is 3.4. However, scoring contribution, and this is where I came back to actual goals and assists, Ralston's 0.5 per game, and Juranovic is only 0.18. So this is a classic case where Juranovic, is actually producing more chances, creating more chances, more aggressive ball carrying. But it's Ralston, because he's had maybe 1 or 2 assists, he's actually got points on the board, and that's what people tend to remember. If you look at expected scoring contribution, it's 0.18 for Ralston and 0.32 for Juranovic. So to your point about going forward and delivery, actually Juranovic is performing a lot better. Or not a lot better, but slightly better than Ralston. Now, where Ralston has been more effective thus far is in what I call ball progression. So this is, think of it, I tend to think of, when I think about performance, almost like 3 different men of the match. Who's been the best defender, defensive action? Who's been the best ball progressor, getting the ball forward, and who's been who's had the most attacking threat? And I think that's a fair way of giving everyone in the team a crack at one of those. So if you look at the middle of that, which is ball progression, then pack passes, so that's forward passes that take players out of the game. In terms of pack passing score, Ralston is averaging 57 a game and Juranovic 44. In terms of recovery, so this is recovering the ball and is therefore taking players out of the game through kind of interceptions. then it's 5 to Ralston and 16 to Juranovic. And in terms of turnovers, Juranovic turns the ball over more often, 14 to 10. But if you look at their total possessions in a game, Ralston averages 97 possessions, Juranovic only 70. Ralston averages 61 passes completed a game, and Juranovic 46. So listen, a lot of data thrown at you there, but if I would summarize it, I would say Ralston's had more actual goals and assists, but Juranovic's underlying data is better. Ralston progresses the ball better and is just physically on the ball more, so he looks like he's doing more because he's involved more than Juranovic is. So that's the kind of summary, if you like. Make of that what you will, but I think that's hopefully a balanced view.
I'll give you the conclusion. Ralston's better. No. No, look, it's obviously, the main thing that I wanted to bring to this was that a lot of people sort of scoffed at the idea that Ralston could come in and replace Juranovic at right back, but Ralston is there for a reason. And if you can't question whether or not your backup right back can come in and do a job equally or as good as the current starting right back, then there's no point in him being at the club, because you're weakening that position. And obviously you can't have like for like in every position, but I think Ralston does bring something a little bit different to Juranovic, and maybe it is that I'm noticing he's getting on the ball a little bit more, and maybe he catches your eye more because he is on the ball. But I thought he was quite good at the weekend, and probably merits a start again tomorrow night. But we'll wait and see. There is obviously the Champions League coming up next week, and there's a game in between that. So it will be interesting to see what happens with this right back situation, because I mean, sometimes the best thing to do for a player is to take him out of the limelight, take him off the pitch, and maybe Juranovic will come back and he'll be even better next time when he's starting for Celtic. So we'll wait and see on that one. At left back, Bernabei came in ahead of Greg Taylor. And James, I know that you love an athletic, fast, strong.
You can't teach speed, Enda. You can't
exactly.
Teach it.
I know you like that sort of fullback. So I'll let you praise away at Bernabei if you so wish.
Yeah, I mean, this was the kind of game that was kind of tailor-made for him, no pun intended, in that, we were on the front foot, attack. They didn't really put together too much in the way of counter-attacking, although it was down his side that they kind of got the goal. I'm not blaming him, but that was the one thing when I looked at him when news emerged that we were signing him, was that he's, being as young as he is, positional discipline seems to be probably a relative weakness. Again, totally normal. So, he's not going to be as, probably game intelligent yet as Greg Taylor, obviously. Not only just because of the time in the system, his age, but, Greg Taylor's, I think, grown into being a highly intelligent player. So, we saw that athleticism come out. The other big thing that he showed, obviously, in his time in Argentina, was his ability to put a ball in the box, and you saw that. That was really his data profile coming out of Argentina was one of just a really dangerous weapon in the final third, on the ball and getting it into teammates. So I think that's, if you think about that from a relative strengths and weaknesses, we saw what they already were. And hopefully he can continue to develop on the defensive side, because obviously he still needs to on the attacking side too. But I think where the relative, area of his game that he has to improve in is on the defending side. The nice thing is he does have the athleticism, and that's, when you screw up and you're that fast, you can run back to hopefully try to make up for it, obviously. But yeah, I mean, I saw a lot of the things that got me excited when news came out that we were signing him.
I think it's interesting as well, and maybe it's down to his athletic ability, but Alan, he played quite far up the pitch, first of all, but also quite wide. He wasn't inverting as much. I had a look at his heat map after the game. He was very much an overlapping fullback rather than inverting in the same way that Greg Taylor naturally does. This is probably a game plan based on his current situation and how well he knows the system, but it also suits the way that Celtic were playing, because quite often in the game, and we'll get on to Haksabanovic himself, but we were seeing long diagonal balls from Cameron Carter-Vickers over the top, and if it wasn't going to Bernabei, it was going to Haksabanovic, and Bernabei was there as a second option. He was overlapping for his assist for Giacomakis' first goal as well. Hatate played the ball through, and he was out the wing. He played a superb ball across the edge of the box as well. So is it because of his different style of play, his different athletic ability, that we're seeing him play naturally overlapping, and that's just what he's naturally doing? Or is that something that you think that Ange might try and change the system while he's in it to bring something different?
No, I think it probably just would be in relation to the where there was space and weaknesses in the Hibs back line. I mean, they were pinging these long diagonals and they were forcing, because Boyle didn't want to be running back the other way, right? And so basically you were nullifying one of their main weapon, really, and also somebody who probably doesn't want to be defending. So I think there was a focus there. Although Celtic tend to be a bit left side dominant anyway. I don't think so, and the reason I say that is because what I've seen of Bernabei in his other appearances, and also in his sort of dreaded YouTube highlights reels, is the fact that I think inverting comes naturally to him. In his highlights reels, he pops up in all sorts of positions. He pops up in 8 positions, 10 positions, all sorts of half spaces. Really quite exciting and unusual and wacky positions. He can be behind the striker sometimes. So I think that's natural for him. I think that's one of his strengths. Just to back up James a little bit on some of the weaknesses, just to think how it kind of manifests itself in the data is, of all the defenders, he was packed, so he was bypassed by forward passes the most with 7, and he also gave up the most turnovers that then forced Celtic players to recover because they were behind the ball with 3. And I think that's going to be that's the rough edges, right? He's got a lot of rawness about him in terms of some of his pass selection, some of his turning into trouble, not knowing quite how to release the ball, being aware of what's kind of around him. Huge upsides. I mean, he's very similar to Hatate in my mind in terms of got all the tools. You can see tick, 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 got all the tools that you'd love to see in a player playing in that position. But decision making and game intelligence are going to come in time. So we've got to give them a little bit of patience, I think. But yeah, great fun, I think he's going to be.
I'm going to make a vast generalization here, but I've never seen an Argentine defender that wasn't a little bit headless at times, but they're incredibly exciting to watch nonetheless. We'll move forward to the midfield. This was by far and away, like I'm a midfield sort of nerd. I love watching the game unfold and the way that different players play different positions. And when we saw the starting lineup, it was O'Reilly, Moy, and Hatate, and immediately everyone was thinking, well, Moy is the number 6 here. Matt O'Reilly's going to push back into the number 8 role, and it just didn't pan out that way. Aaron Moy moved up to the number 8. Matt O'Reilly played as the holding midfielder, and for all intents and purposes, it worked very well in getting Aaron Moy onto the ball more and seeing what he can do creatively. And we'll talk about Matt O'Reilly, but this was the first game I think that a lot of Celtic fans said, okay, yeah, I get what Aaron Moy is now about, because he was very creative. Do you go along with that, James?
Yeah, again, I think this is where the context of how the opponent played is important, because they basically gave him acres of green in which to do that. You saw flashes of when they put kind of physical pressure on him, that he ran into his normal challenges that he has because of lack of pace and quickness. But yeah, I mean, when you give a guy with that amount of talent and ability that kind of space, he's going to rip you apart. And again, this goes back to this how stretched they were and how much space was in between their lines. And he was able to just pick up the ball and then move it along without much of a fuss. And I have another number to put this into context. Okay. So we've been talking about in Europe how different it is for Celtic with ball and play time. So guess what their average ball and play time in games were, and before going into this game in SPFL.
Hibs or Celtic?
For Hibs. Yeah. This is, mind you, that we had 60 minutes against Real Madrid that Celtic had.
Okay. Let's go with 45 then. I'll reduce the number.
Yeah, a little over 46. Okay. That's it. So again, if you think about, they usually have
stroll in the park after the Champions League.
Well, right. So they have 60% possession. That means they're only defending about 18 minutes a game. Okay. This game was almost 55 minutes ball playing time, and they only had 43% possession. So that's almost 32 minutes of time having to defend, theoretically. Again, that's not precise, but you could, again, from a percentage perspective. So not the idea that they look like they were out on their feet a little bit late in the game, and Moyes running around with no one within 5 yards, I think is context. When he picks out that pass to Maeda, which is a brilliant finish, by the way, and a brilliant pass, right? This is not at all to discount what these guys were doing, but this was a Hibs side that was probably like the error from their center back that just gifted us a goal, basically. When you get tired physically, a lot of times you get tired mentally, and you make that kind of just oopsie trip over yourself kind of mistake. So yeah, he was terrific, but I again, I'm not sure how much of this changes anything relative to kind of what we've expected. As we keep saying, styles make fights, and this was a perfect style for Moy to stand out.
Mm-hmm. What did he do differently to Matt O'Reilly as the 8, Alan?
Yeah, so I mean, listen, I just he was further forward, right? So I mean, I think this was a game where we got a little bit lucky in the sense that if you look at the midfield three, O'Reilly was incredibly quiet and just kind of did the bare minimum, I would say, and that's very normal after a game like Leipzig on the Wednesday, because he was absolutely sensational against Leipzig, and I don't use that lightly. I can go through that in numbers if anybody's interested, but he was absolutely sensational against Leipzig. And actually, when we've seen it with players like Ryan Christie, when they're absolutely sensational in the game, the next game they're often quite quiet. They just physically, mentally, they're just gone a little bit. So O'Reilly was very quiet. Hatate, and again, if I tell you, I thought it was one of the worst performances I've ever seen in a Celtic shirt. It doesn't mean to say I hate Rio Hatate, right? I love him. But it was one of the worst performances I've ever seen in a Celtic shirt, right? It really was. Okay. And then you had Moy. Okay. So the midfield, it was lucky. What was lucky for Celtic was the Hibs were so stretched, as James said. And it always was a reverse run of Leipzig 3, Celtic 1, in that they tried to do the right thing. They tried to be true to themselves. They implemented it really badly. And it could have been 6-1 in Leipzig, okay, against us, okay? That's what could have happened. And the game was so stretched that almost the midfield was irrelevant in a sense. Our fullbacks passed the ball really well. Our centre-backs passed the ball really well. And our wingers were dangerous. And we almost didn't need the midfield. We had so much space to play with. And Moyes' joy really came. Moyes' joy came late in the game when the game was done, as James said, after tired bodies and tired minds. Most of his expected assists and his great play was against that kind of. And so I'm not trying to criticize anyone here. I'm just going to give you, what I thought honestly is the context of that. So it was a nice game all round in that sense. And actually, for Moy and O'Reilly to have reasonably solid games whilst trying to cover for the train wreck of Hatate's performance was probably worthy of some note as well. Listen, the wee guy looked absolutely shattered, right? He just gave the ball away continually, turned it over continually. Almost looked like he couldn't control the ball. I think he needs a wee bit of a rest. I'm not down on him. I think he'll still make it, but I think he probably just needs a bit of a rest.
Mm-hmm. It's always nice when you have space in the midfield. I think that's what midfielders dream of, is just having that little bit extra half yard or yard, and Aaron Moy certainly had that. I do think it's interesting that he was playing as the 8 and not Matt O'Reilly, though. It clearly shows you, I guess, what Ange wants as the number 6. So let's really quickly run through Matt O'Reilly versus what Cal McGregor brings to that role. So we've already spoken sort of in depth about defensively what Matt O'Reilly brings as the number 8, which is quite strong. But as a number 6, it's a completely different role. It really is. You're required to cover more ground. But as a link man, I can't think of many players that are better suited to that role, because Matt O'Reilly's range of passing is extraordinary and he's strong on the ball as well. So before we move forward to Haksabanovic and James Forrest, what do you make of Matt O'Reilly versus Cal McGregor, if you could compare the two?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't done a sort of side by side, and I'll try not to just kind of reel off a load of numbers again, but I'll really go back. I'll go back to the Leipzig game because that was Matt O'Reilly. That was absolutely terrific performance. I think he didn't have to do much against Hibs, frankly, and he was pretty quiet. But against Leipzig, which is a top class opposition, second game he's played as a number 6 in the system. And by the way, if you're going to replace your captain and probably the most important sort of fulcrum, if you like, of your team, then you might as well put in the most intelligent player that you have in there. That makes absolute sense to me. But I mean, against Leipzig, he had the most successful challenges and intercepts in the whole team, 13. The next highest was 9. Okay, he had the most packing recovery, so forcing turnovers that put the opposition under pressure with 5. He won the ball back in his own defensive third more times than any player with 5. He won possession back for the team more times than any other player with 7. He had the highest passing score, the highest overall packing score, and by the way, he had the highest overall expected scoring contribution, i.e. expected goals plus expected assists. So that was quite the performance, right? You just wouldn't get all that from McGregor. You wouldn't get that defensive volume. You wouldn't get that goal threat. You would probably get a lot of the good sort of ball progression. So on it, there's potential there against the second best team we've played this season for him to be absolutely phenomenal in that role. Now, he didn't back that up with the same against Hibs, but as I said to you, he didn't need to. The game was done in 24 minutes, and he basically coasted it until he went off. So I'm not saying he's better than McGregor, but I'm just saying that was quite a performance and quite a statement at that level. So I think there's real kind of encouragement there that the McGregor not being available situation might not be as terrible as we think it is.
Yeah, one I've mentioned this before. One of my pet peeves has been the combination of either, the cultural bias towards the battling, breakup play midfielder in that role, or that's where old midfielders go to die. Right? As you get less athletic, you move back to that position. One of those two, and I've always found that kind of crazy. Alan and I have talked about this repeatedly in the past. That this is why I was so hell-bent on embracing McGregor in that role a lot earlier than what ended up happening. I think putting someone who's young, dynamic, smart, has a huge range of passing. He's probably the one area where he's probably a little deficient relative to McGregor is carrying on the ball with pace. But outside of that, and again, you don't need to do that when you're able to move the ball through passing. And that's kind of the inverse of McGregor. McGregor is really good at carrying at pace, but he's not great at breaking those lines vertically. He's good at moving it along out wide, but he's not one to make that risky central pass that breaks lines. So I'd actually, just intuitively, I think he profiles really well in that role. My concern was more so, how can he ascend the learning curve and kind of the muscle memory and that kind of stuff. And as Alan pointed out, we found out pretty well. So, and again, that speaks to probably just his kind of innate game intelligence, which again, I think he shares with McGregor, another just really smart player. So
give me 10 smart players and 1 good player, and you'll make a good team out of those. Moving forward, Haksabanovic, I mean, there's only one thing that you can say about him, Alan, and that he's a player. Like, he is sensational.
Well, I'm trying not to get yeah. I'm sorry, I'm trying not to get too excited, but his data is quite special, and I know he's only played less than 300 minutes, right? So I do need to be a bit cautious. I don't normally get carried away, right? But
yeah,
and
well, I was going to ask you, because it was around this time last year where we were talking about Jota in the same terms, and I asked you, would you sign Jota now? And even though you didn't have enough data on him, you said absolutely yes. So I presume you're feeling the same about Haksabanovic.
I am, and it's because he's got that. What it is, the one thing, if you had to force me to say one thing that I absolutely love about him, it's that he's simultaneously insanely creative, and he rarely gives the ball away, and that's incredible. I don't know if he can sustain it. I mean, his expected assists rate is just unsustainable. It's up at something like 0.9 a game, which is he's just not going to keep that going, right? But he also barely turns. I think he gave away 2 passes in his 45 minutes. He had the highest packing score on Saturday, and he only played 45 minutes. So that reflects not only his ability to play through the lines and to cross the ball in and take defenders out with his crossing, which is excellent. It's really flat, right? It's really flat and really accurate. His crossing is fantastic. He's like Jota. He was a bit of a ball magnet. He's able to get on the ball. He's able to find space. So he's got this gift of finding space. He's got good technique, good control. He progresses it well. He creates chances, and he hardly gives the ball away. So I'm really excited about all of that. The only sort of downside I would say is he doesn't carry much of a goal threat, or hasn't done so far. Really, really quite low. Not that many shots. Most of them are from outside the box and a bit meh. A lot of them got blocked. So that part of his game, I'm not so excited about. But is kind of getting the team up the park, breaking lines, being creative. He's almost like a mix of the best of Jota and the best of James Forrest in that sense. Of quite careful and not Forrest looks after the ball in the final third quite a lot. Jota doesn't really care. He just volume, get the ball in, try lots of stuff, and he's very creative because of that. So early days, like I say, try not to get too excited, but I'm a little bit excited.
It's the greatest insult in the world when you're taking off at 45 minutes when you're playing badly, but it's the biggest compliment in the world when you're taking off at 45 minutes when you're playing well, because it just shows you. He was like, yeah, your job's done, let's get you rested and get you ready for the next game, kind of thing for Haksabanovic. On the goal thing, I think that might just be potentially, now I could be proven wrong on this, but over the long term, I think it could be a situation where it's just like there's just a blockage there, and once he gets the first one, you could see loads of them flying in, because I think what we've seen from him so far is quite an unselfish player. He does go up for the cross rather than for the shot himself, to his detriment at times, because there was times that even in the Champions League where maybe the shot was on to try to go across the keeper and he opted for a cross and it just didn't fall for Celtic in a way. So it can be kind of frustrating there. But yeah, James, do you want to add anything to Haksabanovic before we move on to the man of the hour? Not name scales, obviously.
Yeah, pretty much echo everything Alan said. The only thing I'll say is that I've said this before, and when we signed him, the probably the one piece that's just not quite, it's why he's at Celtic and we got him for the price that we did, is that he doesn't have that high end speed. But outside of that, yeah, I mean, so I think that's a limiting factor as we get at a certain level of opposition, where you get high quality fullbacks. I think are going to be able to handle him because of that issue, or at least handle him better. But yeah, I mean, outside of that, I mean, if he's going up against someone kind of equal or lower, I think he's going to shred a lot of teams domestically, and even in Europe against teams that don't have the athleticism to cope with him.
I'm going to get ahead of the crowd here, because I know this is going to be an argument and a debate throughout the season. Can you play Jota and Haksabanovic on the pitch at the same time?
Hell yeah.
Or should you? I know
I
you
put one on
can.
each wing. Yeah, no, I put one on each wing.
Yeah.
As I say, Jota's actually more
Jota
creative
on the right?
On the right. Yeah, well, he's more creative on the right because he's right-footed, and so therefore he tends to cross the ball more. Whereas on the left, he tends to cut in and have a lot of fruitless shots. I know that seems counterintuitive to people, because it looks like he plays better on the left, but he looks like he plays better on the left because it looks like he's getting lots of shots in as part of that perception. But he's actually, I think I proved this earlier in the season with an article, he's actually got a higher overall expected scoring contribution playing off the right. So I'd be happy to play both of them. I'd play both of them, and they can swap if they want. Hell, they can do what the hell they want. Just get them both on the pitch, I say.
Yeah, if this was Football Manager, I'd be playing a 4-2-4 and getting Giakoumakis on the pitch with Kyogo as well. Because if there's one thing you can say about Giakoumakis, is that boy knows how to finish a chance, because he really does take one or two good opportunities, and he has the ball in the back of the net. Even sometimes it's not a great opportunity. But we'll talk about Giakoumakis maybe again, but because we have to talk about James Forrest, 98th, 99th, and 100th goal in this game, a hat trick for him. The third goal. Maybe Marshall probably should do better. The second one, he definitely should do better. But listen, we won't take it away. It was the quintessential James Forrest hat trick. One at the back post. One, I think I've seen James Forrest score that shot, the third one, across the goalkeeper, where the goalkeeper gets a hand in it, but there's just too many There's just too much power on it. I think I've seen him score about 40 of those goals. But Alan, like, James Forrest was handed a 3-year contract at the start of the season, and there was questions about that because of his age, because of his contribution, because of maybe his pecking order within the side. But I guess, like, outside of the obvious intangible of experience and what he brings in that aspect, I think, are we underestimating what James Forrest brings on the pitch as well? Because we haven't really been seeing all that much of him in the last year.
Yeah, I wouldn't say underestimating. I mean, let's kind of just going to wind back a little bit in terms of where we were. If you go back 4 seasons, then in I think it was I'm just checking this, 18-19 and 19-20 were probably the best of James Forrest. So he would have been 26, 27, years old, that kind of thing, and not just for Celtic, but also for Scotland as well. He really kind of blossomed. He started scoring goals on the international stage. He played the equivalent of around about 50 games as well in each of those seasons, which was the first time I think he'd got that high. And I think it was, I think in the 19-20 season under Lennon, it was, I think, 44 games as well. So that was, I think, the sort of the real purple patch in his career. And if you look at those 3 seasons, his expected scoring contribution. So again, remember, that's goals plus assists, and we know that James is on 100 goals and he's nearly on 100 assists. So he's good for both, right? At the same rate, which is astonishing. Not many players can do that, right? So that's a fantastic thing. So he ramped up to 0.62 expected scoring contribution in 17-18. Then it went up to 0.8, and then down to 0.78, and then down to 0.66. And then in the 2 seasons after that sort of peak of 19-20, he only played equivalent of 11 games in 2021, and then 18 sort of last season. And it just looked like he'd peaked, and it was a marvelous peak, and it was a wonderful peak for a wide player to be averaging nearly a goal and assist every game is in terms of expected goals and assists was fantastic. And then it looked like there was going to be, the injuries were starting to kick in, and it looked like he wasn't as quick as he used to be, and it just looked like a natural decline. And so we were surprised that I was surprised that he was given a 3-year contract, not on the basis that we think he's finished in that sort of absolute sense, just that the natural ravages of time. He's had a long career. Dynamic, speedy wingers don't tend to get better at the age of 30. As we talked about Ronaldo a little bit in terms of recalibrating the way that you play, and I thought James might have maybe be repurposed as a striker that perhaps doesn't chase up and down the line so much, and uses his intelligence and his strengths in that way. But suddenly this season, I say suddenly, but this season he's come out, and then you've only seen him briefly, but he looks a little bit faster again. He looks a bit more direct. I think Postecoglou's got at him. I think he's being a little bit less circumspect than he used to be. And I say circumspect, I don't mean that in terms of he's a defensive player. I just mean he's a bit more careful. If you compare him to Jota doesn't mind throwing the ball into the box, doesn't mind trying a risky thing. Forrest doesn't like taking risks. He likes to know that if he's going to cross it, he knows who he's looking for, and he tries to be quite precise about it. So he doesn't tend to give the ball away as much. But he's giving the ball away more this season. But he's being a bit more direct. He's trying to get at defenders. He's trying perhaps a little bit more aggressive in his passing as well. So maybe this is another Postecoglou trick to get the last embers out of Forrest's career. Because as I say, no harm to James. It's just that you can't, once your pace goes and you're a winger, you can't get that back. He's 30 years old. You can't suddenly magic. You might be able to lose a kilo or so, although he's never been particularly heavy. But it's just the normal ravages of time. But absolutely delighted for him. It was a great performance on Saturday. It wasn't just the goals. He had the highest expected scoring contribution in the whole team. He set up 4 chances as well as scoring 3 goals. So it was an absolute vintage performance from him. And if there's more to come from that, then my goodness, that's quite a pleasant surprise for this season.
Mm-hmm. The only 2 other players that have 100 goals and 100 assists for Celtic are Henrik Larsson and Jimmy Johnson. So how
do we know this? That's a genuine question. How do we know this?
I don't know. I'm trusting the information I'm getting on Reddit. So.
Yeah, I don't think logging of assists was very accurate in the 1890s somehow, but
no, I don't think so. But I suppose the context with the Larson stuff is that Larson was playing in a different period that was much more challenging than what James Forrest was playing in. But nonetheless, it's still an incredible achievement. There's not too many players you can say that have that strong of an output for Celtic, and important goals as well. I remember we spoke about James Forrest last season or 2 years ago, even on the podcast, about like the amount of important goals that he has scored as well in Scottish Cup quarterfinals, semi-finals, finals. He scored in. So like he's not just a dumb winger who throws the ball into the box. He can get a goal as well. So I guess the final point I would make on this, James, is that sort of what Alan is saying there about what we speak about with Celtic squad is it's important to have depth to the point where if your first choice winger is injured, like Jota is, and your second choice winger, like Abada, is out of form or Maeda is out of form, then you have a third depth chart there, then again, to go to trust to throw in here. And Ange actually spoke about this in an interview he did over the course of the international window, how he brought in Joe Hart and Cameron Carter-Vickers because they weren't players who were on last chance saloon, but they did have something to prove. So that brings their performance up. We're probably seeing that with James Forrest now as well, that there's these young guns ahead of him. He's going to have to fight for his place, but if he gets the opportunity, he's going to have to take it. And I guess you could say he took it well here.
Yeah, I again echo what Alan said. What strikes me is that he does look skinnier. Like even to the, I mean, it didn't look like he needed to lose weight or anything, but he just looks that extra bit thinner, and that could be helping him kind of reboot some of that speed, or at least keep it, more stable as opposed to kind of the natural decline. But yeah, I said it when probably counter narrative to what most people would have thought at the time. I was actually okay with and happy with the extension for this exact reason, meaning that, it's not just about the player, it's who the player is, what their role at the club's been. And, my criticisms on Brown was never that he was still at the club or playing. It was how he's being used that to me didn't make any sense whatsoever. So if his role is to be, a super sub and or someone who's a spot starter domestically, do I think he's going to storm the fields in the Bernabeu and and give nightmares to Real Madrid? Probably not. I don't think that's realistic. But could he come on as a sub and do a job and dominate domestically against the vast majority of teams? Absolutely. I think he's a terrific player. And the two moments I'll always remember, one is the goal against Karagandhi. And I think, I thought he was the best player on the pitch in Munich in the 2-1 loss in the Champions League. And I think it was 17-18. And I think that was his best season. And he looked like a Champions League player against one of the best teams in the world that game, to me anyway. That's my recollection. Maybe I'm glorifying it because I've been a James Forrest mark for a long time. But yeah, so those are the two things that I'll always kind of remember. And yeah, I'm just thrilled. It's thrilled that he's been able to do it. I hope he gets the 100 assists, and I hope he continues to be used in a productive way that's kind of a win-win for everybody. And he can, I think, maybe reclaim some of the legacy that he's never had in the minds of some supporters, if that makes any sense, because I think he deserves it.
Mm-hmm. I've always found the perception of James Forrest very, very strange for a player who's won 20 major trophies to be questioned around whether or not he's going to be remembered as one of the greats for Celtic. Is just so fucking bizarre in the way that people react to him and his performances. But look, I think it was nice that he got the 100, got the 3 in this goal, because he may not get too many more opportunities in order to get to that milestone. So it was nice that he was able to tick them all off in one game. But we'll keep an eye on James Forrest going forward and how he's used. Unfortunately for him, like myself and Anthony Ralston, I think he is just that build where he puts on weight very, very easily. And even when he's skinny, he still looks like he's carrying a few extra pounds. So yes, I'm throwing myself in there. Look, before we finish up, we have a League Cup quarterfinal tomorrow night, 6:15 kickoff, which is just
early.
Yeah, disgusting. It's a disgusting time for a game of football for match going fans, but also for people who aren't going to the match. It's just not very good scheduling, is it? Are we going with the same team? Are we changing it up a little bit? What are our general thoughts ahead of this?
Well,
I have no idea.
Yeah, I'd expect some changes. I guess. Yeah. I don't know what though. I don't. I mean, if Haksabanovic was feeling a bit sore, maybe he won't be risked. I don't suspect if Jota's still not 100%. I'm hoping we're at a stage now where we're not risking players who are not, not 100%. So as long as we put out a fit team, I mean, the great thing about the game on Saturday was just to see how well if you just think of it as a squad, how well Bernabé's settling in now. Haksabanovic is really hitting the ground running. Abelgor is getting minutes in his legs. Even McCarthy, Moyes contributing. Even McCarthy's chipping in with some minutes as a bit of a kind of closer outer in games, which makes sense. So everybody's contributing now, and so I think domestically those in that injury situation shouldn't. We should be in a fortunate position. We've got a big squad, right? We've got a talented squad. We shouldn't be worrying about injuries in the domestic sense. But you need the players to kind of step up and perform. And as I say, Bernabé was the one I was a little bit worried about. He's looking like he's really kind of growing into his Celtic shirt. So yeah, I guess I'm not saying I don't care who we play, but I'm almost I wouldn't be worried whichever 11 we put on the park at this stage.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I'll be curious to see if Siegrist gets a run out, if he's kind of the cup keeper, so to speak, at least in the League Cup. Because again, a guy of his pedigree and success as been a good keeper. For him to never play, I think would be, pretty tough for a guy like that to swallow. So I would suspect he might get the League Cup. But
yeah, I think it's a good show. I think Siegrist is seen as being not that far behind Hart. I think he'll play tomorrow. I think you're absolutely spot on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and you need him sharp. I mean, that's the other thing. I mean, Hart's no spring chicken. So if he ends up getting hurt or something, you'd need him, ready to go. So yeah, that's probably the one thing that jumps out to me.
100%. My final point on this is that I want people to put some respect on James McCarthy's name, because he probably is, after James Forrest, probably the most disrespected footballer at Celtic Park at the minute, just because of the nature of his signing. He's actually a good player. Like, he used to play in the Premier League.
Careful.
As did John Lundstrom.
for a very brief period.
Look, I guess we'll finish it up there. We'll be discussing again probably 2 games next week, or maybe we might do a podcast later in the week. We'll wait and see how our schedules work out. Actually, no, we will not. I can guarantee you we will not do a podcast later in the week, because I have a stag do to go to this weekend. So
how dare you.
So enough of that, and that's probably enough for today. And if you want to get this podcast, you can watch it back. If you missed the start of the show, you can get it on the YouTube channel, and you can subscribe as well if you want to get notified every time a video goes live or we go live with the podcast. And if you missed the podcast, you can get it on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast as well. My thanks to James and Alan, as always, and thanks to you for listening and watching, and we'll chat to you next week. Good luck.